When I first started getting into meditation, I was about 14 years old. I was at the Lake Geneva, Wisconsin Public Library, and many of the books that I would read invariably would have a section right up near the front which would say, your mind is a very, very naughty monkey. The monkey mind term, which most of you I'm sure are well familiar with, would be introduced very early. And often the author would even direct me to, something like, now close your eyes and try to focus on absolutely nothing, or try to focus on your breath exclusively, or something like that. And I would do it, and it would be damn near impossible, and there'd be a million zillion thoughts coming around, and then I'd come out of the exercise, and the next words the author would say is, "You see?" Something like that. And so the premise in a lot of these books and from a lot of these teachers was, yes, the mind is a naughty monkey, jumping from branch to branch, not particularly effective at what it's doing, and therefore requires training, or therefore requires some kind of disciplining. And I bought that. It made sense to me. I was, coming from the American Midwest, which is kind of a no pain, no gain, has a no pain, no gain kind of ethos in it. That was there. Myself, I think, had that ethos in many ways, regardless of where I'd be born on this planet. And so I was like, okay, great. Along the same lines, a lot of those books would be, okay, here's a list of virtues that you need to develop, and you'd be like 10 or something like that. And once you get these virtues down, then you'll really be a good meditator, something like this. And I'd read through the list, and about 2 out of 10 of them were essentially, well, I have those. One of them was honesty, and because I was honest enough to know that 7 or 8 of the things were not in my bag of tricks, shall we say. And then I would think, well, that's why they say, count on this whole process taking hundreds or thousands of lifetimes or something like that. And I was very glad, later to be introduced to a very different philosophy, which I'm sharing now. And that is essentially that the best way to work with the monkey mind is not to make it one's enemy, not to try to sort of chain it or beat it into submission through just force, but rather to give it ideal bananas, rather to bribe it. Because the secret is that actually, while, yeah, sure, at first blush it would seem that the mind is incorrigible, that it's just something that can't be dealt with, in any kind of easy manner. But that's really not true. You can just look at people having peak experiences. People who have peak experiences are not necessarily yogis for years beforehand. People who have peak experiences are, in the often just very comfortably in the middle of the bell curve in terms of, people's proneness to have such mystical experiences. And yet in the peak experience, you're in the pocket. Your mind has fallen into a deep state, probably samadhi in many cases of peak experiences. Perhaps it's not universal, but probably that. And, nobody in those peak experiences, at least when they're recounting it to Maslow when he's doing his initial research, is saying, and then, yeah, I was deep in the flow state. I was observing life moving perfectly from this deep, silent presence, and good heavens, I had to get out of there. It's not true. On a more on a simpler level, think about listening to your favorite music, whatever it happens to be. When you're listening to your favorite music, typically most of us do not have to continuously tell ourselves, keep on track. No, don't veer off. Stay with me. No, most of us, when we're listening to our favorite music, it's just happening. The mind has more tendencies. The mind enjoys what it enjoys, and what it enjoys is not just pointless, useless mental junk food. Certain things that the mind enjoys take us into deep states of consciousness. Further, what the mind really enjoys the most is that is that strata of experience that everybody at some point in their life has dipped into in the form of the peak experience. The mind absolutely loves samadhi, or turiya, or as the Christians call it, the peace that passes all understanding. That is its happiest place. I think of it if the monkey mind likes bananas, that place is perhaps like the celestial realm of the greatest bananas. And so in a spiritual path, the mind at no point needs to be treated as an enemy. In fact, eventually it becomes a friend. At some point, if it's been introduced to some kind of pleasing track, some pleasing pathway that goes from wherever your surface mind happens to be down into samadhi, it'll remember that at some point. And then you get into this territory of real virtuous circles with it, and you get feedback loops going in the other direction. And it starts to, more and more, almost automatically be inclined to go in that direction of the subtle and the deep, as opposed to the shallow, the gross, and the scattered. It likes the coherence of the depths. There's different ways of doing this. My path has been through mantra meditations, primarily for 20 plus years. This really fairly relatively unknown practice called the Ishaya's Ascension. Also, I enjoy Sanskrit bija mantras, doing them in an effortless manner, not machine gunning, not nothing like that. But there's other ways too. I mean, many people have profound success with the breath. Many people have profound success with, I'll say, mantric forms that are in other languages than say Sanskrit. There's many ways that available to transcend. But what makes all of those common is that for some reason, there's something about a word or phrase or particular breath pattern that is just both pleasing and also has the tendency of pulling you down into those depths. And so I'll elaborate on this. You may have, it's very common to have people talk about killing the ego, which to someone of my dispositional tendency, that's also very, it was very exciting language. Oh yeah, this is going to be intense. Anything intense was considered, good, or good beyond reproach. And I have to say that it's an unnecessary stance. In fact, frequently I'd say it's absolutely counterproductive and kind of silly. The harder one pushes against either the mind or the ego structure, however one is attempting to define that in their own experience, it becomes like a game of whack-a-mole at Chuck E. Cheese's. You push down hard, it's going to pop up somewhere else. Rather, it's far better to, again, use some kind of meditative vehicle. And I shared a couple in other videos, one spontaneously at the end of I think a video, part 3 of what the hell happens when you meditate for a zillion hours or something like that. And that's a very useful one. So I recommend that Sanskrit bija mantra. I'll do another video on that, just on that, probably next. But where was I going with that? Right, kill the ego. You don't have to do that at all. Really, I mean, when it happens, it's not as we think. One doesn't have to take a meditative hammer, and just whack oneself like Silas, in the Da Vinci Code, or anything like that. This is really rather a game of melting. And really the problem is that most of us in this particular civilization, early on, have not been given a decent vehicle, a decent pathway to connect to that infinite space. Because once you start touching that space, like a lot of bad habits that one has, a lot of whether it's a mental bad habit or a behavioral bad habit, they don't all disappear from that. I don't think there's any kind of panacea, no matter how good a meditation practice is, but they become profoundly weakened. Like you literally do lose your taste for certain things because you're tasting something sweeter. Samadhi is not some like boring thing that you have to like, is this a silence? Oh, it's, that you have to, force yourself into. As perhaps sometimes it is, but it's largely profoundly fulfilling. Much more fulfilling than it is to just kind of, sit around, thinking thoughts with no sense of anything deeper. It's compared to that, it is the nectar and the ambrosia. Compared to that, and it can sometimes be subtle, like this subtle fulfillment that starts to build up in your experience as you're doing practice. And there'll be a time when, you've got subtle fulfillment right along with, a bunch of BS. Totally normal, because most of us have to go through a process along the way of kind of off-gassing a lot of stored tensions. That's just part of the deal. But the whole path isn't also some sort of thing where it's like we have to, be starved of anything nourishing, or anything enjoyable, and like just have to sort of gird ourselves to, like, oh, I'm gonna hang in there. Maybe there's some lives like that, but most no. Most of us actually have, if you're doing a good meditation practice that is relaxing your nervous system and starting to connect you with samadhi, or even consciously connect you with some of those subtle but also pleasing and expansive states that are right above it. Even contact with those, sort of propels one. There's something of the end state or the end goal is sprinkled all along the path. Something of it is there for all of us. If you're doing, a path that isn't ordeal shamanism or something like that, I don't think most of us are meant for ordeal shamanism as a end-all be-all sadhana. You can do of a pleasing practice. And so too with the ego, like some people, this is a little bit maybe more esoteric or more advanced. So it's another common occurrence of, even very quickly in doing a practice, is when people will actually start to have consciously have these really deep relaxed states, like for instance the breathless state, or maybe we'll say the quasi-breathless state or whatever, when you really don't need to breathe anymore much in a meditation practice because you're so relaxed that you're not consuming the oxygen at the pace you normally would if you're more stressed. And so people love getting into that state, and just as common during the same meditation, there might be something that stirs the body up a little bit, and then all of a sudden you find yourself gasping for air. Then people get very frustrated. They're like, why did I have to gasp? Damn ego, damn survival mechanism. Similarly, it might not be the breathless state, but sometimes one can be in these extremely deep, unitive, non-local states, and often something in the person's physiology, something in the mind-body matrix will be like, this feels like death. Let's get the adrenaline pumping, and then people find themselves, coming out of that space, and then getting frustrated. I've been frustrated by that at one point, but then I realized, it's just doing its job. It's and actually the wonderful thing about that ego, called ahamkara, one of my favorite terms and philosophical framings for ego is, out of Sanskrit, ahamkara meaning I maker, that which gives one a sense of some kind of individuality. One of the cool things about the ahamkara is that it actually can learn, and so over time, it actually learns to filter out and not have those deep, absorbed meditative states trip an alarm. Fascinating that it can do that. It's going like, nope, not a cliff, not a bus, not a something. We'll let this pass. It's brilliant. Similar with the breathless state. At a certain point, it gains the wherewithal and intelligence not to get freaked out by that. So even this ahamkara, my point of saying that is that it also is not incorrigible. It like the mind actually is capable of reform. It's, just we kind of have to, be consistent and go with the process with something that's effective for sufficiently long enough time, and there we are. And typically when dealing with both the mind and ego, ahamkara, it's extremely helpful to be doing hatha yoga or tai chi or qigong or neigong or something similar. It's incredibly helpful to be doing. You don't really have to do like fancy pants pranayama, aimed at inducing kundalini. You can be doing nadi shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, and that simple, and that paired with the yoga is really an excellent help in having the body kind of keep up with the changes that are happening in the mind and the psyche, and it makes the journey all the more smooth. So there's just a very simple practical tip you find all over the place. Let me look at my notes here. Oh my God. And another thing about discipline, and I found it in some commentary, or find it referenced somewhere. I have to actually track down the commentary, so hopefully this isn't BS. Maybe it is. Maybe the attribution is BS, but actually what I'm going to say I don't think is. And this is, I read some commentary of some sage, I think maybe misattributed to Shankara, which is talking about concentration and talking about Patanjali's use of both dhyana and dharana in the Yoga Sutras, absorption and concentration. And so many people have interpreted that as straining again. This particular commentator flipped that on its head, and I think it's much more accurate. And they're saying like, no, it's not the concentration of some kind of warrior or something forced. It's actually more similar to the concentration that a baby has when it's breastfeeding, or a mother has when she's feeding the baby. This is a soft, bottom-up, organic kind of innate. It's there. Concentration, but this soft, organic, innate concentration is 10 times stronger than anything we're trying to achieve sort of top down. And thus also this concentration is rather something that's waiting for us right now in every moment. It's like a built-in function. And so instead of having to sort of focus entirely upon like working concentration like a muscle, which actually I think is wonderful. I engage in those sorts of things myself. But for meditation, the 90% of your gain isn't going to come from doing these things, tip of the nose, perhaps. I think 90% of the gain in concentration is just sufficiently relaxing the nervous system to go down and touch it. To go down and fall into something that's already there. That's both. It's not simply a metaphor. It's actually what's actually going on. But that holds as a process to describe both plucking to that level of concentration and also slipping into deeper states of consciousness, and also having those deeper states of consciousness start to become an ongoing lived experience in the background, even in the foreground of waking life. It's all the same trajectory. It's all the same thing. And it's all the same process, I should say, in that one is simply relaxing into what's already there over and over and over again until that can be sometimes the boring part that people quit on. But that's that. So to recap, monkey mind, feed it a banana. Ego, not as big a problem as people try to make it. And like and subscribe if you like these videos. And feel free to check out my websites and my Substack, the various courses in effortless meditation that I teach. If you'd like to join in, I teach them on Zoom. That was lovely to sit with you for another one of these chats in the olive grove.